Hello and welcome to November's book review. Excused my tired and haggard looking face. I haven't slept very well, so I will try my best not to ramble, but that's what I'm already doing. So this month, you could title it The Good, the Bad and the Downright Awful with the books that I read. So it's a very mixed bag this month. There is 5 books to go through. So again, that's why I need to try and be concise, because otherwise this will go on for a very long time. So the reason why there's 5 books is because we obviously had the one left over from October to review as well, because I hadn't quite finished that by the time I had to film the book review video. So because there's so many, we're just going to get right into it. So the first book I read, well, at the end of October, not at the beginning of November, is The Partisans' Daughter by, and I've asked my brother how to pronounce this name so many times, and every time I forget. So it's Louis de Bernieres, who you might know as the author of Captain Corelli's Mandolin. But this one, I've never read Captain Corelli's Mandolin, by the way, so I've never read any of his writing before. But this is essentially about a man in his marriage that he's not very happy with, and then he goes looking for a prostitute and then comes across a Yugoslavian woman who isn't a prostitute-ish, and it's about their weird relationship. I have to say I wasn't overly keen on the book. Neither character I particularly warmed to very much. Rosa, who's the Yugoslavian woman, I didn't trust a word she was saying. I didn't feel anything for her other than I don't trust you at all. And then Chris, who's the older man in the not so happy marriage, he's just a lonely, seedy old man in my opinion, and not a great character. It was all a bit weak in that kind of sense. Also the way that it was written I didn't particularly like. It was very Rosa said this and then Rosa said that and then Chris said this and then Chris said that. It didn't flow very well. It felt like a sort of 5-year-old had written it, with and then I did this and then I did that, and that's very much how this book felt, which I thought was a bit weird actually, considering how well renowned the author is. I don't know whether this is before or after, but that irritated me a lot. And then there were just lots of bits that I couldn't get on board with. Obviously, as you know, because I do mention it a few times, I'm newly engaged, or recently engaged, September. So reading about a man who is essentially cheating on his wife because his marriage is so rubbish wasn't so much fun. So that wasn't great. And there was a lot of bits of history that I don't know anything about. And maybe if I knew more about the history, then I might have got into the book a bit more. But largely it was just a book with characters that I didn't like doing things that I weren't that keen on, about things that I didn't know anything about. But on the plus side, I did like the fact that it was all written in sort of past tense, so it's Chris looking back on this event in his life as an older man than he was in this. But yeah, basically it was kind of miserable and kind of just not my thing. So I'd say this would go in the bad if we're going back to our good, the bad and the downright awful. This would go in the bad pile, and that was The Partisans' Daughter by Louis de Bernieres, who I'm probably still pronouncing his name wrong, but there we go. The way I thought about planning November is I'd read a women's fiction book, I guess you'd call them, maybe, I don't know, but a sort of romancy kind of thing, and then a thriller. So that's how we organised it. So the first book I read in November was Sweet Sorrow by David Nicholls. Now, I've wanted to read this for ages because I really like David Nicholls, I like his writing, I have all of his books behind me, there's one there and then the rest are here. But I'm not a huge fan of hardback books, so I had to wait till it came out in paperback, and then I had a voucher to use at Waterstone, and this was in the buy one get one free, so was definitely going to pick it up. That is a long ramble that you didn't need to know. But there was something very nostalgic about this book, for me personally. It was set around places that I've lived, which always brings back memories when you're reading a book and it's set somewhere that you know. That always makes it slightly more enjoyable for you because you know where they are and what they're doing. And The whole book, again actually this is one where it looks back at the event, which I found I actually quite enjoyed, but the whole thing is set in an amateur dramatic performance of Romeo and Juliet, and as a child who did Amdram, and as a teenager who did Amdram, I could relate. So yeah, a lot of it was quite nostalgic for me, and that just helped with my enjoyment of the book. And the fact that it was set in an amateur dramatic performance of Romeo and Juliet, as I say, both of which I've done amateur and Romeo and Juliet, I just liked it a lot. I could, as I say, and I've said it many times, I could just relate, and I really enjoyed the characters, how the main boy, Charlie, didn't really want to be in it, but was doing it because he fancied the girl, and all of that kind of stuff. And yeah, it was basically a coming of age story, and one that was written, what's the word I'm looking for? It wasn't over the top. It was very much how a lot of teenage relationships are, from my opinion. But what was great about this is you get to see what happens after the event. And that is something all books need to do, because it really frustrates me when, you know, they get together and then the book ends and you're like, yeah, but what happens? Particularly when it's teenage and young romantic love like that. Because you're like, do they actually remain together as they would imply? But what happens next? And this does it. It's something like a 10-year reunion or something like that they end up going to towards the end of the book. You get to find out, and I loved it. And one of the clever things that David Nicholls did is he managed to interweave a lot of the Shakespearean language into his text, but not that it didn't make any sense. You knew exactly the meaning of it, which is brave for one thing, because a lot of people see Shakespeare and they turn their head away from it because, you know, it's confusing, and it is sometimes. But the way it's interweaved is just very clever and fits perfectly at the times and helps move the story along rather than hinders it, and that just found it very clever, as I've said. So I really enjoyed this book. I'm glad that I finally got to read it. It's not my favourite of the David Nicholls books. I think I'm weird because my favourite is The Understudy. I don't think that's everybody's or anybody's favourite, but it was a very enjoyable read, and the best way of saying the feeling of this book is I just found it very cosy. It was just a very easy, enjoyable, I wrapped up in a blanket and cuddled Jeff while reading it, and we were both super comfortable and enjoying ourselves. So yeah, that was Sweet Sorrow by David Nicholls. So then we went on to our thriller bit of the month, our first thriller, and I read What We Did by Christobel Kent. This, if you remember from a few months back, I said that my mum had given me like thousands of books, not thousands, that's an exaggeration, but she gave me a lot of books, and this was one of them. And it's a thriller. The taglines on the front is "He stole her childhood, she'll take his future," and yeah, all I can say is it's a little bit absurd. I quite enjoyed it. The whole "she'll take his future" was not the turn that I was expecting, and actually throughout the whole book I had no idea where this was going because it went off in some really strange directions that I was not expecting. I wouldn't say it was tense or particularly gripping as some thrillers are. I think because I've read Gone Girl I've sort of spoilt myself, because that I could not put that book down, whereas this, you know, I read a bit and then I put it down and I wasn't keen, I wasn't hankering to go back to it to find out what happened. But where Christobel Kent took this book, it is daft, it is a bit silly, but it was quite enjoyable. The story would just suddenly twist in a direction that I wouldn't have thought it was going to go in, and then it would get even sillier. There was a whole sort of subplot with this journalist that I didn't really get, and I didn't really get why it was in it, and I still don't really understand why it was in it, because even with the ending and stuff I don't see how she was relating to it, but there we go, it was in there. But I'm not sure I liked the ending, to be honest. The problem with trying to review books like this is you don't want to give anything away, so it's hard to actually talk about them fully and properly without spoiling stuff, and I don't want to do that, because if you do end up reading this, I'd love to know what you thought. But the ending was a little disappointing for me. I'm not sure that's how I wanted it to end. But yeah, this, I mean, it doesn't fit into any of the categories that I put it down with. This is just a bit daft, but quite enjoyable, so I guess it would go in the good, but it certainly isn't up to Sweet Sorrow or the next book that I'm going to review. But enjoyable nonetheless. So that was What We Did by Christobel Kent. And then the next book, we went back to our chick lit or women's fiction or whatever you want to call it, and of course, we had to go to the Don, my absolute favourite, Mrs. Millie Johnson. And this is My One True North. This is the last one that I hadn't read, unless she's released some and I don't know about it. Again, I was waiting for this to come out in paperback before I bought it, and then I saw it in the supermarket and I was like, oh, I've got to get it, which is how I often feel about Millie Johnson books. And there's a quote on like the first page of this from Heat magazine that says, every time you find a new Millie Johnson book, it's like finding a pot of gold. And that's just how I feel. I enjoyed this a lot. So this follows two people who lose their partners, and then they meet at a group to help with bereavement and stuff like that. But the main male character in this, the main male protagonist, is called Pete. So when I read the blurb and it was like, and Pete has lost his partner, I was like, oh, I'm dead. That's a shame. But obviously it's not me. But that did sort of make me amuse myself for a little while. This is probably one of the sadder Millie Johnson books I've read. They don't normally tackle, I mean, she tackles difficult subjects, but because it's all about grief, it is quite a sad book. It doesn't have quite the frivolity as some of the other Millie Johnson books, but she does write it incredibly well. She is very sensitive with grief, and yeah, I just think it was written very cleverly and very well thought out. I probably mention this in every review that I do about Millie Johnson books, but I always love the little extracts from the Daily Trumpet, which is the newspaper that always gets everything wrong. But in this book we actually got to see behind the scenes a bit of the Daily Trumpet, and I liked that a lot because often they are bits that I find most amusing in them, and to see a bit more about that whole newspaper and how it's run and all of that was like peeking behind the curtain of something that you know about but you want to know more about. So that's a good behind the scenes for that, and one that I hope that she revisits again, because as I say, and I probably say it in every Millie Johnson book, but all the books are sort of linked together. The characters appear in all the other ones, although to be honest in this one I didn't quite get that. I'm pretty sure the leader of the bereavement group has been in another book, but I don't remember her as much, and I'm pretty sure she was a main character, which is telling me I need to go back and reread some of these Millies. So we'll see whether I can do that at some point. There was a supposed twist in this. It was kind of obvious, but it didn't take it away. Just the way that the book built up, you knew what was coming. I think that was the point. I don't think she wanted it to be like a shocking twist for you. But the fallout of those characters finding out about that twist, which is shocking for them, is really interesting and very well written. And then as a very tiny character named Reed, I just want to say, ugh, horrid man. He's only in it for like 3 chapters or whatever, but if you've read this, you'll know what I'm going on about when we talk about Reed. Ugh. But yes, this is definitely part of my good pile. This is probably my favourite book that I read this month. It is a close tie with the David Nicholls one, but Millie's my fave, what can I say? So that was My One True North by Millie Johnson. And then we get on to the last book that I read. And this is quite possibly, in fact it's not quite possibly, it is the worst book I have read all year. It is The Well by Catherine Chanter. The quote on the front says that it's riveting. It isn't. I can't tell you the amount of times I fell asleep while reading this book. I know I've not been sleeping very well, and that may have played a part, but I've read other books while I've not been sleeping well and I haven't fallen asleep during them. The amount of times I fell asleep. I found it so hard, so I set myself about a 60-page target because then I can read a book a week essentially. I couldn't do it. We had to cut this down to 40 and even that was a struggle. I just didn't get on with it at all. There's no blurb to this book, so I don't know why I picked it up. This actually came from Pete's granny's house, so I'm sure I must have found the blurb somewhere and read it, but I couldn't find a blurb in it, so I didn't really remember what it was about. And actually, to be fair to it, it should be a really good book. It's full of... It's set in a time where the UK has been in a drought for countless years and there's a lot of problems and people getting... there's a lot of unrest, except for this one little patch, I think they're in Wales, called The Well, that seems to still get rain, and it's the only place that gets rain and is thriving. And then there's a whole bit about a religious cult, and the grandson is killed but you don't know how or why. So it should be good. There's a lot of elements to it that should make it good, but I just did not enjoy it at all, and I don't think I've spoken about a book like this in any of these book reviews. I just didn't get on with it at all. Like, I'd be reading it and the words just wouldn't commute into my brain, wouldn't commit, wouldn't... Yeah, I had to read sentences and pages and stuff multiple times. I just found it so difficult. And it's not even that hard a book to read, I don't think. I didn't like the writing style. I think that's a lot of it. I found that there was way too much faff in it. There was so much description in it and all of that, which is fine. I like a bit of description, but a description that moves the story along, please. And this didn't. It was just slow moving. Sometimes it was just a complete halt on the story while we discussed, I don't know, some plant somewhere, and it just didn't. It's also like one of those films where there's like 6 endings. It felt like this had 6 endings. I read it and I was like, surely this is the end, but I've still got 45 pages left to go, so what else can she put into this book? But yeah, no, it didn't have... And then when it did finish, it didn't really have an ending. I can't say anything positive about it. I'd love to be able to say something positive. Obviously I wasn't a big fan of the Partisans' daughter, but I could find bits in it that I liked. But I couldn't do it with this one. This one was just hands down the worst book that I have read this year, and that is The Well by Chanter. So there you have it. There are the books that I read in November and October for you. If you've read any of them, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to know what you thought of them, whether you loved this book. If you loved it, tell me what I'm missing. And yeah, that's the end of this. So if you've liked it, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!